Hello all you beautiful people, it is that time of year again and I am just so gosh darn happy to share with you my favorite movies list of 2023, which is truthfully a top tier year of cinema for me, like top 3 of all time. I loved going to the movies this past year so much and wound up just falling in love with a ton of movies that remind me why I do this year after year and why I just cherish this passion I have for movies, talking about movies, and loving and appreciating what goes into every movie I see. I know there are a lot of flops and controversies surrounding certain films, and even the uncertainty of whether certain movies will be released due to the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strike. Luckily, some things were resolved, and while I'm no expert about what goes on behind closed doors, I can say for certain that I am truly grateful to see these movies and be able to talk about them with you. This is my ranked list, yours may be different, and that's cool. I may have some movies ranked higher and lower, or some I may not have seen or didn't have interest in, or so forth. But I saw lots of films this year, and since this was a favorite year of cinema for me, I'd love to share with you my top 20 favorite movies of 2023. And to prime that, I have so many honorable mentions that I sadly can't give each a one-sentence review, since it would drag out the length of this video. But just know that these were all movies that I loved, and especially the last half dozen I mentioned were very hard not to include on my final list. But rapid fire, here are my honorable mentions. Megan, Haunted Mansion, Wonka, Jesus Revolution, Scream 6, Suzume, Barbie, Asteroid City, The Inventor, Elemental, Transformers Rise of the Beasts, and Talk to Me. So again, all amazing movies you should definitely check out, and I had a phenomenal time watching most of these in theaters or at home. But without further ado, here's my list of top 20 favorite movies of 2023. Number 20, John Wick Chapter 4. One of the most epic conclusions to a series I've probably ever seen that just elevated each action set piece with more spectacle and emotion. Keanu Reeves should be proud of the work he's accomplished in these films and the commitment that made these movies so memorable and a staple in action and espionage cinema. Number 19, Rebel Moon Part 1. Technically, this is one of the more flawed films on this list. I could even see my last few honorable mentions being technically better than this film, but overall, I was enthralled by this movie. Zack Snyder set up a space opera universe that felt so immersive and visually astounding, even on the small screen, that I'm dying to see how it eventually concludes. I was super invested in the conflict and loved the band of characters introduced that I'm sure will have more time to shine in Part 2. But for what it was, I was thoroughly entertained. Number 18, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. I find it weird calling it Part 1 since the next movie, now delayed to 2025, isn't going to have Part 2 in the title. But nonetheless, I felt like the stakes in this movie were the highest they could have ever been in this franchise. Each action scene just blew me away, and having a chance to see it in a Dolby Atmos theater twice, I just couldn't get enough of the masterfully directed action cinema Christopher McQuarrie choreographed. Tom Cruise is a gem in the industry, and the fact that movies like this still get made leaves me so overjoyed, and I'm proud to call this my favorite Mission Impossible film ever. Number 17, the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Who knew a movie like this could have even worked? I mean, the cast list was even laughed at by many, myself included. Lo and behold, this was a true adaptation of the games we all know and love, made with such care and authenticity that reminds us why we love the fun to be had in Mario games. The sheer creativity and inventiveness that makes these environments feel so alive came across so beautifully on screen, and it even made me love characters like Mario, Luigi, Peach, Bowser, and so on more than I already have. I felt like a kid again and just loved that there was another medium to enjoy the wondrous universe created by the talents over at Nintendo. Number 16, Blue Beetle. This is one of the best superhero origin movies I've seen in recent years by far. I loved seeing the cultural representation put into play that made me not just fall in love with Jaime Reyes, but his whole family. The dynamic put into play was honestly superb, and held the film together in the best possible way to go along with such pulpy superhero world building that I'm genuinely surprised was able to be made and grace the silver screen and not just straight to streaming. I really hope we see this iteration of Blue Beetle continue in James Gunn's DCU, and in spite of this particular film being a part of the now ended DCEU, but nonetheless on its own is still a spectacular superhero movie and maybe one of DC's best. Number 15, Saw X. This was a franchise I always was meaning to get into, and to prepare, I did actually watch every single movie in this series. And I can say I was pleasantly surprised by this movie in particular because this is my favorite Saw movie right next to the original. The fact they were able to recapture that magic found in the earlier films by not only having gnarly kills, but a compelling character-driven story. Tobin Bell probably gave his best performance in the franchise, and one of the best I may have ever seen in a horror movie. John Kramer is by far one of the most interesting characters ever written, and this movie really did an excellent job making you understand and feel for him on a deeper level. This movie rules, and I am so excited about the franchise's future. Number 14, The Creator. Gareth Edwards is by far one of the most underrated directors working today. The fact he was able to make a movie of this scale competing against other major blockbusters is really bold. And I thought he made a tremendous sci-fi film that had brilliant originality and a lot of heart that honestly left me choked up and floored as soon as the credits started rolling. The surrogate father and daughter dynamic was absolutely beautiful. I thought the scope was excellent. By far some of the best visual effects work I may have ever seen, going along with such remarkable cinematography. This was one I'm genuinely glad I got to see in a theater because a film like this was made for theaters. Number 13, The Flash. I know this movie has its fair share of thoughts, and I also acknowledge its controversies, but as far as this movie goes, it was one of the biggest surprises of the year for me. I wound up absolutely loving this movie, and I've already seen it 3 times. What I loved so much about The Flash was that it stood apart from other superhero movies by being its own style that felt zany, Silver Agey, just like a wacky Saturday morning cartoon come to life. If you look at it like that and not so much a dark, dramatic epic like Zack Snyder's DC films, I thought there was so much fun to be had with this movie. I get it's not getting acknowledged as being one of the greats or that visually it was distasteful, which I can acknowledge for sure, but overall the ends justified the means for me, and I had such a blast with this movie and loved seeing these worlds of the DC multiverse collide in a pretty fantastic giant-sized issue of a DC comic book. Number 12, Sisu. The one thing I joked about with this movie was that it was the best Wolverine movie I had ever seen, because honestly it felt like that to me. The period piece angle is excellent, and I love the main actor Jorma Tomila's physical acting, but it was just the rage infused in his performance and the revenge-filled story that led to such gruesome on-screen carnage that blew my mind. It was all so completely satisfying and was so non-stop that I couldn't wait to pick up the 4K Blu-ray immediately after I rented it. It was a simple revenge film, yet very effective in its execution, no pun intended, and I was so invested from beginning to end and thought it had some of the best action scenes ever assembled in recent years. Number 11, No One Will Save You. A movie I didn't remotely think would be on this list, and I only found out about it releasing so much later in the year. Honestly, this was another refreshing case where we had another brilliant, original sci-fi horror film made at such a grand scale. This was such a gripping and enthralling movie from beginning to end, and a superb performance by Kaitlyn Dever. You cared so much about her character, and what was more impressive was that it leaned more towards its visual storytelling with minimal dialogue. I just appreciated a genre film like this to tell its story this way, and take advantage of its visual medium, and I honestly was so pumped that a movie like this existed. Number 10, The Boy and the Heron. Another emotionally enthralling visual marvel by the stupendous Hayao Miyazaki. His passion for creating such artful animated projects still shows, because I was once again swept off my feet by a very human story, a coming-of-age story at that, but also seeing a suburban fantasy world that continued to grow more and more immersive affect the emotional journey of our main lead. Everything about this movie worked for me, and I couldn't be happier to have another visual feast by one of the masters in animation. Number 9, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Speaking of emotional movies, this last outing by James Gunn and his Guardians trilogy is by far one of the most emotionally impactful cinematic experiences I may have ever witnessed. These are characters I've grown to love throughout the MCU, and their last outing did not disappoint in the slightest. And the fact that there were aspects to the character development that would change the way I looked at these characters really says something for how incredible of a writer James Gunn is. Right down to the humor and the drama, this was by far one of the greatest projects the MCU had to offer, And with the success to be had in his previous outings in Marvel, I couldn't be more pumped to see James Gunn grace that same creativity, heart, and humor in his future projects for DC. Number 8, Evil Dead Rise. I could not be happier that we had another Evil Dead movie released in this day and age, and it kicking so much butt and being as awesome as it is. Sure, this was a shared universe spin-off, and we didn't see former characters, but this was still as gripping and fun as its predecessors, which reminded me why this is my favorite horror franchise. I loved the family dynamic and how that was the driving force for the movie and made the experience even more heart-wrenching in my opinion. The lore was still crazy, the kills were just as insane as its predecessors, and above all, it made me just as excited as I had been before to be invested in this franchise. Number 7, Chicken Run: Dawn of the Nugget. The long-awaited sequel to one of my childhood favorites that I still love to this day. And this sequel delivered in more ways than I thought. It honestly took me back to the days of not only loving and enjoying the first Chicken Run, but the thrill as a child of seeing a sequel to a film I loved with characters I was invested in on a brand new adventure. It was so endearing and just as witty as ever, with some darkly funny elements that Aardman is amazing at incorporating. I've always enjoyed the stop-motion work Aardman created over the years, and this was still as delightful as ever. Number 6, Godzilla Minus One. A release that completely snuck up on me, and even though I'm not as diehard of a Godzilla fan as some, considering I haven't seen every single film in the franchise, though I've seen a good chunk, I still have a love for this franchise and was willing to give it my time of day when it dropped in theaters in my local area. I'm happy to report that this is by far the best and my favorite Godzilla movie I've ever seen. The monster conflict was visceral and very chilling compared to its predecessors, but the human story this time around was beautiful. I cared so much about the psychological repercussions of our main lead and wanted him to succeed in the action. I loved the late 40s period piece aesthetic, the performances were amazing, and overall was just a very moving story that made me tear up 3 times during the movie, which I didn't see coming at all. This was the perfect Godzilla movie, and maybe the best we're ever gonna get, and I can't wait to watch this one again many times. Number 5, Wish. As a Disney fan, this movie satisfied all my needs. The music, the animation, the characters, and the imagination and wonder that put it all together. This movie to me definitely celebrates what I love so much about Disney animated movies, and I was still delighted and moved as much as I would be with other Disney movies. I've already seen this movie twice in theaters, and I'm still excited to see it a 3rd time. Asha was a terrific main lead, the ensemble was great, and I thought Magnifico was a very strong villain that didn't need to be a Scar or Maleficent, but just a step over Gaston by being a selfish and powerful sorcerer. I had a marvelous time with this movie, and I think I'm confident enough to say it's up there for being my favorite Disney animated movie in the modern era. As of now, I still need to determine that ranking and have some fun with that, but to me, even if it is a commercial or critical failure, I don't care and won't let it bother me. I just let the joy this movie brought me wash over me. Number 4, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. I honestly thought after No Way Home that there was not going to be a Spider-Man movie to top it. But lo and behold, Across the Spider-Verse comes around and not only blows that movie out of the water, but so many other comic book films I know and love. This was by far an achievement in animation filmmaking, blending so many unique styles together to create another piece of cinematic brilliance. I felt it was emotionally more intense than the first film, and this incredible sense of urgency that just made me so excited not only for what's to come in Beyond the Spider-Verse, but just the sequel on its own. It deconstructed what Spider-Man is, the morals that went into being the hero that he is, but also was just a grand celebration of Spider-Man as a character. And I thought a genuine character like Miles being in the mix to question all that led to powerful storytelling I couldn't get enough of. Across the Spider-Verse is a work of art. Number 3, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. I had to give the slight edge to this movie in terms of superhero movies and animated movies, because as much as I think Spider-Verse was a stupendous piece of cinema, I thought Turtles succeeded just as well. I do think Spider-Verse is technically the better made of the two, but as far as viewing experience goes, I enjoyed watching TMNT slightly more due to the fact that this movie was just brimming with so much joy, color, and intrigue about the entire world of TMNT. And as a recent fan of the franchise who already loved other iterations of the franchise through other films and shows, I was able to fall in love with the Heroes in a Half Shell all over again in a brilliant new animation style and bold new take. I loved its raw, hip-hop 90s influence with still that modern flair, but it also had a lot of heart to go along with such great comedy. I'm so excited for what's to come, of course, and to dive deeper into the previous iterations. But all I can say about this movie is cowabunga. Number 2, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. This is a franchise that's been a part of my life for so long, and what I found so special about this particular entry, and what I find in Lucasfilm Productions specifically, is the fact that there might be big spectacle to go along with the adventure, and a sense of discovery along the way. But at its heart, a film like Dial of Destiny is a very personal story, and the fact it was about a broken man in Indy trying to reconnect with himself in his own life called for a very powerful Indiana Jones movie in my opinion. I was lucky enough to see it 3 times in theaters, and it held up for me each time. Harrison Ford may have delivered his best as Dr. Henry Jones Jr., and even Phoebe Waller-Bridge was a fantastic sidekick as Helena Shaw, that also had an arc that was pretty strong and was an interesting antithesis of Indy as an explorer. This movie really touched me, and if it didn't work for some, whatever. It was full of that same old-school Indiana Jones adventure, but at times it felt somber in a very effective light that soon elevated into one of the most satisfying cinematic climaxes I may have ever seen. Dial of Destiny shook me to my core and reminded me of the magic to be had in genre storytelling. Now, my number 1 movie you probably could already guess, because if you know me, you know how much I love this filmmaker, and was pumped out of my mind to see his next endeavor. So with that said, my favorite film of 2023 is Oppenheimer. This film is one that I can confidently call an experience, and not just because I was lucky enough to view it in immersive 70mm IMAX for the first time, but like a lot of other films on this list, this movie truly captured the personal struggle of one's own humanity as we saw in Cillian Murphy's masterful performance of J. Robert Oppenheimer. And I think what truly amazed me about a film like this was that the subject matter is just not something I would personally ever get into. And I can appreciate history and how it lays the groundwork for so many things in this world, but the way Christopher Nolan executed this whole film through this personal tale, and did it with such an artful touch, those concerns about being uninterested in history didn't matter anymore. I was invested in a truly engrossing story that was about trust, morality, the importance of intelligence, and even humiliation. I love Nolan's crisp film look to go along with such a lifelike period piece aesthetic, and Hoyt van Hoytema's cinematography may be the best he's ever done, and just captures every shot with such power that each moment felt like a different canvas you just wanted to study. I know I might sound pretentious, but I was just amazed that a film that was more about a human conflict and battle of wits that had minimal action affected me the most out of any movie I watched this year. This just goes to show how truly talented Christopher Nolan is as an artist, and is by far one of the greatest who ever lived, and a film like Oppenheimer proves how much a film of this caliber left an impression on me as someone who's always loved movies. But 2023 is going to be a treasure for me in regards to the amazing movies I've seen and can revisit each year. Thank you all so much for joining me. Watch and enjoy these movies if you can, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, everyone.